Greetings, lords and ladies. This video is, don't know how long it's going to be, but I want to outline some philosophical principles and refute some other so-called philosophical principles by others. And I might need to split this video, we'll see. Regardless, there is no doubt an incredible amount of hostility towards men going their own way. I mean, this is well documented. And there's a reason for this. And the title of the video, as you can see, is Rational Self-Interest versus Reproductive Interest. Now, they're not necessarily the same thing. In fact, people conflate them all the time. And it's very interesting because for a man, rational self-interest is not synonymous with reproductive interest. His reproductive interest. Same token, rational self-interest for a woman, not always, but very often, is synonymous with her reproductive interest. I mean, the fact that we have this phrase, women and children first, is a testament to that. They're seen as synonymous, as sort of one and the same, more or less. And this leads us to divergent paths. That means that women oftentimes can pursue their self-interest with it coinciding, along with coinciding self-interest with their reproductive interest. And men have to make a fine delineation, a distinction between their reproductive interest and their self-interest. Now, of course, you could spin it any way you want. You can say, well, it's just a matter of interpretation, blah, blah, blah. And yeah, there's some truth to that. But at the end of the day, it's very important to note that MGTOW, we as men just decide to do our own thing on our own terms, in our own interest, and that's it. Many of us, most of us, are either not interested in reproduction or just don't see it as a viable option in today's climate. And so we say, fuck it, and we just do what we want to do. And that's a big problem. That is rational self-interest, as opposed to reproductive interest. Now, what happens when men, in any day and age, in the past, now, decide to put a priority on reproductive interest? Well, they have to make lots of sacrifices. It costs them their health very often, and sometimes it can cost them their lives. Now, add that to the political stew that we find ourselves in, and of course, it's even more precarious. So, they're not one and the same. But you see, people have always had a problem with men expressing rational self-interest, and the reason is simple. Men are the creative force of humanity. Our analytical skills, collectively speaking, of course there are always deviations and departures from this, are unrivaled. Women, generally speaking, don't come close to it. We men, generally speaking, we have built civilization, and that of course was in large measure based on reproductive drive, no doubt, the desire to serve the female. However, for the first time ever, in at least modern times, men are coming together and expressing rational self-interest. And that is something that people cannot countenance. Women in general cannot countenance it. Feminists can't countenance, and traditional conservatives can't either, because they're still stuck in the reproductive slave modus operandi. And it's very interesting, because when women express self-interest, which very often, though not always, coincides with the reproductive interest, women and children first, I mean, it's a synonymous term, they're not faulted for it. But it's only because there's such a distinction between men living for themselves on their own terms, and men living for everyone else. I mean, men, basically, generally speaking, are expected to live for everyone else, expected to contribute to the general weal, the common weal, and they're expected certainly to live for women, certainly to, in the case of reproduction, live for their children, and for society at large, en masse. When men choose not to do that, they're threatening. Now, the distinction, of course, here to be made between this and, say, bachelorhood is that this is a very conscious thing. This is a conscious movement, if you want to call it such. I'm not a fan of the word movement. And it's happening in ever larger numbers. You know, the odd bachelor who just keeps his mouth shut and lives his life, they don't mind him. But the people who have problems with us, with men going their own way, doing things on their own terms, our society in general, women in general, declared feminists, and of course traditional conservatives. And this is a very interesting phenomenon, I think. A lot of this hostility we see direct to us is in large measure coming from traditional conservatives. And this is, of course, due to the fact that traditional conservatives are essentially conformists. Not only are they conformists, most of them are hypocrites. And I'm going to spend the rest of this video talking about some particular hypocrisy we find in the traditional conservative circles. But let's make this clear one more time. Rational self-interest as opposed to reproductive interest is distinguishable in men and far less so in women, and thus when men decide to go their own way, they stick out like a sore thumb, and people don't like it because it means we're not serving the collective. We're not serving the general weal, and we're not serving women above all. Now, moving on. As everyone knows, blocking Mr. E has reached the point of, I guess, insanity. I think he's mentally ill on some level, or suffers from some sort of narcissistic or megalomaniacal personality disorder. I don't know. But and so I don't see addressing him as an individual as worthwhile. But there are some points, terrible points, right there, that he makes that could be addressed. For one thing, the positions he offers are, for all his talk of being a libertarian and a someone who fights for liberty, are fascistic. I mean, he is a fascist. I mean, I can only base it on what he says in his videos. Maybe he's different in real life. I have no idea. It doesn't interest me. So, based on the material he's offered to us in his videos, he sounds like a fascist. He sounds just as much as a fascist as any feminist would. Why do I say this? Well, he thinks that he's made statements such as, and I'm paraphrasing here, that only couples who can naturally reproduce should be allowed to do so. So for couples having fertility problems, they have to adopt, according to him. They're not allowed to make use of in vitro fertilization or other biomedical technologies that are emerging. Nope, they're not allowed to do that. And one thing, and moreover, so this is a dictate. You cannot do this, and I'll get to the reasons why he says this. The other thing is, whether you agree with gay people or not, he also says that gay people should have no interaction whatsoever with children. None. Now, maybe you agree with him, maybe you don't. I am neutral on this subject, which of course extends to gay adoption. Gay people adopting children. No, 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 no. This is also a dictate. Now, if you are a libertarian as opposed to a fascist, his attitude would be akin to, well, most of ours. And this is my attitude. My life is my life. It's only my business. I don't have any authority to tell others what to do. I don't have any authority to tell others what to think or feel. I may not always agree with them, but it doesn't give me the right or authority to tell them what to do. He might be bothered that gay people are adopting children, and he might be bothered that couples with fertility problems are making use of an in vitro fertilization, but it's not his business. His business is his own life and his children's life up until they become adults, when they cease to be minors, and that's it. He has no business in telling anyone else what to do with their lives. And of course, he does. And he claims to be a libertarian. But this, of course, is the hallmark of a fascist. He is a a fascist. He doesn't say it's none of my business. Do what you want. I don't agree with it, but do what you want. He says this is the way it is, and because I say it, it is thus. Now he grounds his grounding, and he backs this up with the claim that this is all based on natural law, i.e., natural rights. He makes these incredibly fallacious claims about uh, natural human rights being derivative from nature, from natural law. Literally, that, uh, for example, the consensus that we have that you shouldn't engage in theft can somehow be linked to the laws of nature. For example, the laws of thermodynamics. It's absurd. It's absurd. Uh, he does this, I imagine. I mean, he might be mentally ill. We don't know. It seems to be, on some level, he might be. But it seems to be, if he, in his own mind, that he believes that the that it sounds cool. It sounds cool to say human rights, natural rights. And he doesn't like that term. Natural rights are derivative of nature. But in nature, we find mostly red tooth and claw. Now, that's not to say that we don't have certain evolutionary proclivities to expressing moral, what we would call a morality or a kind of moral behavior. I mean, reciprocal altruism is, in fact, a viable mechanism that has a lot of evidence going for it, but that is not a complete moral system, and nor is it a complete system of justice. These are sort of urges that we have, and they're highly inconsistent as well. More or less, by and large, the system that we have in nature is one of red tooth and claw, kill or be killed. So this idea that laws and natural rights, as he puts it, are somehow derivative of nature itself, it's absurd. More to the point, there are plenty of species in nature where you have identifiably homosexual animals partaking in child rearing, or at least helping out with the process of child rearing. So, if you really want to just go by nature, then you're kind of off there. It's it's absurd to say the least. Now, I'm going to continue with this, but as you know, because of the silly copyright infringement I have on my channel, I have to split this up. So this will be part one, and I will see you in a little